What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day. We're going to be jumping back into some more Kaiserreich Universe videos here with Kaiserreich Cinema. We're going to check out episode 3 in this Kaiserreich Universe documentary as we check out the British Revolution. You know, in the last episode, they really kind of got into the French Commune and how socialism in this, you know, what if Germany won World War I, alternate history scenario, how socialism kind of really took front and center stage after France pretty much kind of collapsed after the end of, you know, the war when Germany won, and now how socialism has spread through the heart of Europe and has really taken seat through France into Italy up through Britain with the British monarchy being you know, dethroned, and has essentially started spreading through a lot of places in the world. So I guess we're going to get into the British side of things and how that revolution happened there. So links will be down below as always in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiserreich Cinema's channel. So do me a favor, if you enjoy this video as we go through it, go give it a like, and if you've been enjoying this documentary series so far, you know, consider giving the man a sub. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your support to the next level, you know, check those out and see if you would have any interest in it. You know, you can get early access videos, priority any kind of reaction requests, members, Discord channel stuff, all that kind of stuff, and more hopefully to come to add for you guys. So check all that stuff out. But regardless, let's jump into this video. So again, this is Kaiserreich Universe Documentary episode 3, The British Revolution by Kaiserreich Cinema. Let's do it. Oh, that's a little loud.
This video was sponsored by ourselves. More specifically, our new spin-off project, Flagmaker and Print, is a free online service which allows you to design and print your own custom country flags. I'll have more info after the video. Enjoy the show, guys.
Pretty cool, you know, it'd be something you could use on a lot of different things. You could make flags for, you know, like standards for Warhammer or anything like that. Pretty cool, pretty cool.
The Victorian Golden Era saw the British ascend to a superpower status, the likes of which the world had never seen before. By the dawn of the 20th century, Great Britain boasted an empire upon which the sun would never set. Vast territories and populations under her control, resources beyond human imagination, all guarded by the greatest fleet that had ever sailed the seven seas, the Royal Navy. In those golden days, the empire seemed unassailable.
It's pretty crazy too how like a nation on this little island ended up becoming such a global powerhouse for so long, you know.
However, her fortunes were about to change. For a spectre was haunting Europe. It was the spectre of syndicalism. The Great War, believed at first to be a quick campaign to subdue the upstart Germans, began a decade-long process of entropy and finally collapse for the British Empire. At the Somme and Passchendaele, from the jungles of East Africa to the North Sea, the Germans chipped away at Britain's imperial advantage. Into the war, Britain poured the wealth of nations, massive sums in gold and silver, material and lives, all accumulated over centuries of imperial rule, all spent in pursuit of victory. But then the war came to an end with a whimper and without a victory. The war's early optimism was replaced with deep hopelessness. As trains full of coffins returned from the front of a lost war, the people of Britain were forced to ask the damning question: What was it all for?
Yeah, what was the worst?
As the new decade brought more hard days, not less, and the debt-riddled government floundered, that question echoed from the Houses of Parliament to the city streets. What was it all for? To most, the 1919 peace...
I mean, really, when you think about it, man, like the early 1900s till like pretty much the end of World War II was a really kind of depressing time in the history of the world. Like the various wars going on, no one really had any resources. A lot of places were pretty impoverished. You know, we had the Great Depression here in the States, and things were pretty like not looking good for a lot of places in the world at that time period, man. So it's crazy kind of the time that we live in now compared to back then, and how much, you know, better off we are now.
With honour seemed anything but. While the cities and towns of England had emerged largely unscathed, Britain nursed a set of deep and debilitating wounds. London, once the world's financial capital, found itself profoundly in debt. The nation's youth, once heralds of a new age, lay scattered in shallow graves. With them died the national spirit, once proud, now broken, tainted by pessimism and despair. While the powerful mourned Britain's lost standing, the poor struggled to scrape by. Demobilization left millions jobless, and the nation's debts ushered in a new age of austerity. Yet, even as the almshouses filled and the breadlines grew, the government found a new object for its spending. Britain's fleet was aging, and with the war's end, German naval programs resumed unabated. To match the Kaiserreich Marine's new Bayern and Mackensen classes, as well as its newer unfinished designs, the Royal Navy ordered a new round of naval expansion. Britain, the government said, could not afford to lose the seas as she had lost continental Europe.
Like if you've they're an island nation, you know, I mean, if you're cut off from the rest of the world, then you become isolated, and your empire is gone. They've got to keep up with any kind of naval progress.
In the streets.
I mean, that's why the United States has such a powerful navy, because, you know, we are essentially an isolated country over here, and in order to impose any kind of force on foreign countries, we have to have that kind of naval asset power.
Many struggled to afford the price of bread. The British Empire, strained by humiliation and economic downturn, began showing cracks in her fragile, multi-ethnic web of dependencies. From Dublin to Delhi, the subjects of an empire once thought invincible began dreaming of a future free from foreign domination. The delicate line of dominoes that formed the British...
Yeah, at this time in this alternate universe, like, Germany controls the heart of Europe. So, like, if they want to have any kind of sphere of influence, they've got to make sure that they've got their naval armada, you know, able to compete with what Germany's doing.
The British Empire had begun to wobble, and Ireland, so close to home, would be the first to fall. Ireland had been a hotbed of discontent long before Britain's fortunes turned in the Great War. Her long-existing tensions had already erupted into open rebellion during the Easter Rising of 1916. Although authorities crushed the insurrection, martial law remained in effect across the island, and sporadic fighting continued as the war progressed. By 1918, attempts to introduce conscription sparked draft riots, heavily depleting local loyalist paramilitaries, the Ulster Volunteers. Sensing their chance, the increasingly separatist party Sinn Féin called for a boycott of the draft and resistance to the Royal Irish Constabulary, causing its leading members and, most notably, its president, Eamon de Valera, to be arrested for conspiring with Germany.
It really is crazy, though, like, when you sit back and you think about this alternate reality history, that this is all just based off of a mod for a game. Like, to me, that's just the most fascinating thing about it, is just, like, all of this is sparked from a mod for a game. And so, like, they've created this, the detail that's gone into the story of this, and, you know, actual, living people and how just different things have happened. It's so fascinating to me.
The ongoing riots and strikes in Ireland reached a fever pitch at the Home Rule elections in December. Sinn Féin, London's hated enemies, took the election by a landslide and inaugurated their own legislature, the Dáil Éireann. On December the 8th, the Dáil declared Irish independence with German backing.
No longer will the people of Eire sit under the jackboot of the English occupant, the London aristocrat, the
Right,
oppression
exactly.
of the RIC man. Today, we make right our unlawful occupation by the Anglo-Saxon and return Ireland to her rightful owners, her people, her government. This legislature, the rightful government of the Isle of Ireland, hereby declares independence from Great Britain. I call upon every man of Ireland to take up arms against the oppressors. We shall have our freedom, or we shall have death. Erin go bra!
When the news reaches Lloyd George in London, the Prime Minister is furious. In a special session of Parliament, the British government moves to eliminate the Irish rebels via underhand and sinister.
I mean, of course you're going to be furious, right? Like, you're in the middle of having to deal with a spreading German influence. Now you have an uprising at home that's, causing political dissent. Of course you're going to get pissed off.
The tactics. British troops, fresh from the European front, depart for Dublin, and soon German arms begin to flow into Irish hands.
Yeah.
As the war drew to a close
Of course,
in Europe,
Germany's going to spy
it
him.
would continue with cloak and dagger along many conflicts around the world. Despite harsh words and the deployment of troops, Lloyd George's faltering government is determined to fight the Irish war quietly. British soldiers are only to play a supporting role, alongside the Royal Irish Constabulary and their associated paramilitary units, like the Black and Tans, demobilised soldiers from the Western Front. Nonetheless, following its disgrace at the Treaty of Versailles, George's Liberal government collapses in the December elections and is replaced by a Conservative alliance led by Bonar Law. As Law's new Conservative government takes power, he vows to crush the Irish Revolution decisively. The limitations placed on British troops are removed and direct action is encouraged. The violence escalates
Yeah, it's
rapidly,
only going to escalate
and
things, I was
soon
going
the
to
River
say.
Shannon runs red. Lurid tales of atrocities reach London, shocking the populace deeply. Law's approach is fueled in part by fear and desperation. Across the Channel, France has continued its descent into civil war, and by early April 1920, the situation has clearly spun beyond the government's control. Radical forces in Britain are elated, and talks in the streets speak of revolution, a government for and by the worker.
Yep.
The government uses war.
Which, I mean, obviously, with an uprising already being started in Ireland, that's only going to spread that even further. Which, I mean, that makes more sense now, too. Like, hearing this and how this happened would make more sense as to how, these socialist ideals could take more root. Hearing that, it's had success in France, Ireland, wanting to seek their independence and rising up, the British government stating that they're going to crush this insurgency, escalating things, leading to more violence, and it essentially is still coming down to the common man is the one that has to deal with all this stuff. So of course it's going to lead to them being disheartened and wanting to rise up for themselves.
Wartime legislation to clamp down on leftist agitators, but complete suppression is impossible. Soon, a number of fringe parties merge to form the Syndicalist Party of Great Britain.
Yeah.
Over the next several years, the party of the gear and torch will rapidly expand, quickly absorbing much of the radical leftist political scene.
It's also interesting how this somewhat, mirrors the hammer and sickle from, the Soviet Union. It's just slightly different, Instead of the hammer and sickle, it's the hammer and the torch surrounded by olive leaves and a gear.
Early 1921,
Actually a
Law's aggressive
cool,
policies in Ireland
symbol
are
for a
widely
flag.
regarded as having been a failure. With the war ongoing, and with a growing list of atrocities accredited to British troops, his government finally sees the writing on the wall. In July, they reluctantly sign a truce, followed in November by a peace treaty, and on December the 10th, 1921, Ireland is declared independent. As crowds gather in Dublin to celebrate, the occasion is marked in Berlin with handshakes, champagne, and words of congratulation. Even with the war's end, a loss for Britain is a victory for Germany, and it seems so.
Yeah, syndicalism is like just another branch of like socialism. It has its own, it has its roots, you know, in a similar idea, but it's different.
Certain that the faltering empire is now living on borrowed time.
In the end, it was not our victory in the Ved Creek that defeated the British Empire. What defeated Britain was Britain itself. Overextended, exhausted, with the countless millions who chafed under her rule waiting for the first signs of collapse. It then pains me greatly to see our own Reichstag make the very same mistake.
It's interesting to say that he's, the words he's talking about are how Britain essentially, they collapsed in upon themselves, and from what we were going into from the last episode, that seems to be the case with what's happening with Germany, where they've expanded too quickly and taken too much territory too quickly, that they've got too many fires essentially burning in the oven to be able to deal with it.
Not a decade later, how many British colonies can we absorb before the Reich is stretched to her limit?
Yeah.
What use is a world empire if a tiny spark can burn it all down in a heartbeat?
By 1923, the British Labour Party has grown rapidly, spurred on by the promise of a fairer future without austerity and poverty. With the more radical syndicalist front suppressed by the wider government, leadership is handed to a Labour government in hopes of appeasing the agitated populace, groaning under economic hardship. Despite their electoral victory, Ramsay MacDonald's Labour governs as a minority, dependent on tacit Liberal support. A commitment to peace, an end to austerity, and much-needed housing reform are all popular measures, but as Britain wallows amid economic crises, these promises are left mostly unfulfilled. Repeatedly confounded by its nominal coalition partners and unable to pass effective policy, the government collapses amid the fallout of a minor legal scandal, having lasted less than a year. Protests erupt in the streets, outraged at the swift collapse of the only leftist government in memory, as more and more Labour notables begin openly sympathising with the wider leftist front.
The nation was in decay. You could hear it, feel it in the streets. It began with the miners, you see. Illegal papers began printing slogans like "War of the Lords" and "Lions led by donkeys." When the war ended inconclusively, we had lost so much and gained nothing. In the place of our foreign enemy came a domestic one. Revolution. Government for and by the workers. They called it syndicalism.
Following the collapse of the Labour government, the Tories, Liberals, and a breakaway Labour faction under MacDonald form a national government vowing to clean up the budget and exercise constraint. Among their first acts is an end to the naval expansion programme launched nearly 4 years earlier. Once seen as a vital necessity, the rising issue of war debt repayments and the expensive shipbuilding programme threatened to collapse the budget. Simply put, the government could no longer afford a large navy. The ailing empire faces dramatic deficits, and printing money risks inflating the pound, then still...
Yeah, I mean, without any kind of naval influence, the British Empire is just going to collapse. They're not going to be able to contain any of their colonies. They're going to have uprisings in India and, you know, just throughout the world. So with their economic collapse and them not being able to maintain their armada, that's pretty much donezo for them.
Still the world's currency into oblivion. With the stroke of a pen, the dockyards in England fall silent, sending 10...
And I mean, with their currency also going belly up, and I believe, you know, at that time, the British currency probably was like the world standard, right? Maybe I'm mistaken, but I think during this time, British currency was like the world standard. So that would also potentially have a collapse on that would affect other nations potentially, including America, I would think.
Tens of thousands into unemployment.
So now Germany responsible probably for the world,
Sensing
and now
the
they cleaned the mess,
instability,
right?
foreign governments begin dropping the pound one by one. The British government is forced to take draconian financial measures to keep its currency afloat.
Right.
Britain's once great fleet rots in underfunded naval bases, and tensions with radical factions in the military begin to rise.
Well, and the other thing is too is, right, like, what are they going to do? Are they going to sell their ships off to any other countries? Who else could buy them at the moment? The Germans would probably be about it. And would the Germans even want to do that? You know what I mean? And would they even want to sell, obviously? Are they going to fund their enemy?
Popular outrage swells, and mass protests fill the streets. It would only take a single spark to light this powder keg. On May the 13th, upon hearing the news of the massive fleet decommissioning and pay cuts, the iconic HMS Hood lands in Plymouth and starts a full-scale mutiny. Although the mutineers are soon arrested, a large crowd at the docks intimidates the police into releasing their captives and calling for backup. The subsequent violent crackdown leads to an open riot across the city. The strikers
That's all it
soon
takes. That's oftentimes all it takes, man. Is just a little thing like this to spark, you know, a greater fire and cause, you know, revolutions.
Support from the Transport and General Workers Union, which calls for solidarity strikes. The national government responds by promptly banning the union. Outraged, Labour and the trade union movement announce a nationwide general strike, and prosecutors face off with the police across Britain. The government, fearing a French-style revolution, moves quickly.
Yeah.
The military...
I would think that, yeah, after seeing what had happened in France at the end of the war, that would be the biggest thing that they would fear, but they're playing right into it. The pretty much same things happening here that happened in France. You've got a government who's not able to hold on to its power and who isn't able to take care of its people, and its people aren't happy and are taken to the streets.
is sent in to support the police. The situation in Plymouth is tense, but it would be a small, sleepy port in Wales that would dramatically accelerate events. The end of the British Empire would begin, of all places, at Port Talbot in Wales. In September that year, a soldier at Port Talbot panics and opens fire on striking workers. In response, the strikers storm the local barracks and assault the garrison.
Again, all it really takes when tensions are high is just a little incident to spark things. Just get it going.
The national government, confused and panicked by this
People look
unruly
for an
mob,
excuse.
declares a state of emergency and begins banning multiple leftist organisations. Labour MPs that speak in favour of the strikers are arrested in the Commons and charged with sedition, a major breach of parliamentary privilege. With blood flowing and violence exploding across the nation, the government mobilises the Territorial Army. The loyalty of these local forces is found wanting, however, as large parts of the Cardiff regiments go into mutiny. The workers and soldiers declare the Cardiff Commune, and much of South Wales falls to the rebels. Around the same time, syndicalist rebels and soldiers clash at the Battle of the Railways in Livingston between Edinburgh and Glasgow. The disorganised and undersupplied army is defeated by the rebel surge, and much of Scotland falls to a syndicalist uprising.
I was going to say, you know, it's surprising to me that Scotland and all of this wouldn't also kind of want to seek maybe their own kind of independence like Ireland did. But maybe it's just been so long that they've been so entrenched in, you know, British, you know, culture, and they're just essentially part of the empire for so long that maybe that wouldn't have been the case.
Scottish independence groups mix with the left-wing front and declare a Scottish republic. Across England, police officers and soldiers desert their posts. Liverpool declares itself a free city and falls to the rebels by December. She is joined by Manchester on
so
Christmas Day.
Britain's kind of just breaking down in almost city-states now, with the nation kind of breaking apart into little, like, independent factions of its own. This is pretty crazy.
The home isles are tearing at the seams, with tense firefights erupting over key points. The British Civil War has begun. In 1925, with royalist artillery thundering in the distance, the leading caste of the trade unions and leftist parties gather in Liverpool to formalise their revolution and declare the Union of Britain. The Union Jack, the flag that has flown over the British Isles and much of the world for the better part of 5 centuries, is taken down. In her place, the soldiers raise an unfamiliar red, white, green Republican flag. Based on the little-known British Republican flag, the new scarlet hoist is proudly emblazoned with the golden symbol of the syndicalist gear and torch. The Internationale proudly proclaims that revolution in Europe is only the beginning. From Dublin to Cape Town, from Los Angeles to Tokyo, one day the world revolution would come to every nation. 3 scarlet banners now fly over Western Europe.
That's pretty
and
crazy.
More would soon follow. Gathered syndicalist militias line up outside and salute the rising crimson banner as an orchestra plays the Internationale. With thunderous applause, the Union of Britain is declared as the successor government of the United Kingdom.
No longer will the workers of Britain suffer under the yoke of the ruling class. No longer will we yield the power and fruits of our labor to...
I mean, it really is crazy to think about it. Like, in this alternate timeline, the outcome of World War I is essentially laborers, the working man, rising up all across, Europe and Britain or whatever, and seizing power from their governments. It's essentially destabilized their governments, and the working man is just taking over. It's honestly kind of interesting to see how all this is happening.
Noble houses built upon theft and slavery.
And I mean, it makes a kind of sense too, right? Because of how brutal World War I was. And just the tactics that essentially were used, the trench warfare, gaining inches or feet at a time, losing thousands of men to gain so little territory just to sit there entrenched. And it often, is, the question is, what was it really worth? Instead of right as fascism, see right as socialism, that majestic intent was going to lead something. Right, exactly. Yeah.
No longer will we die in foreign wars to line bosses' pockets. Now is the time of the common man. The iron worker and the pitman, the fighter and the shipbreaker. Now...
It's also interesting, though, that how much it's like essentially... how much of it is uniting all the different countries under the same idea, like not all of Central Europe, but a big chunk of Central Europe from France down through Italy and now up through the United Kingdom have essentially all allied under the same, syndicalism ideal and have become now a unified front, which was obviously not something Germany had predicted, thought of, and necessarily wanted. And then now, not to mention, from the last episode, we see that these ideals start spreading through the States, through Japan, and through a lot of other major countries. Yeah. It's fascinating to see this.
We build the workers' state, a union of Britain. Let our chains be broken forever.
After the ceremony, George Lansbury is tapped as president and A.J. Cook is elected chairman. Leading Scottish officials join the Union of Britain, leading to a unified syndicalist front and the dissolution of the Scottish Provisional Republic. The fall of Wales sends the royalist government into turmoil. Martial law is declared for the entirety of Great Britain, and the royal family is evacuated to Canada under the guise of a state visit.
Interesting. So essentially the British royal family moves to Canada, and Canada then kind of becomes like the royal nation of Britain.
the Union manages to...
And then I think parts of Africa are where the French powers went to. So yeah, I don't know. That's fascinating.
...push down towards the River Trent as the Territorial Army begins to defect near the Greater London area. The opening phases of the war saw successes for the Royalist forces, however. Especially the difference in artillery and naval support means that the Royalists, backed by the ever-loyal Royal Navy, managed to hold on to the most important coastal cities and push the syndicalists inward in many confrontations. The war escalates further by foreign volunteers streaming into the United Kingdom. Foreign troops from both sides of the ideological struggle clash on the British Isles, now a war zone. The technological advantage of pro-government troops soon proves to be ineffective against the ideological fervour of the syndicalist rebels, who begin to outnumber Royalist forces after mere months. Despite their best efforts, no artillery can match the teeming masses of disgruntled workers, revolutionary partisans, and inner-city folk that join the revolution en masse.
Well, I mean, there also comes a point where, like, if you lose enough workers, you can't maintain your stuff. You know, you can't maintain your weapons. You don't have people in the factories making bullets and ammunition. You don't have people maintaining your ships, etc., because all the workers have revolted against you. So, like, what are you going to do? You know, there comes a point where you can't function anymore as well.
By spring, the Royalists' fortunes would turn. As Royalist forces push out from the cities, they soon find the disloyal worker population of the areas they control turn against them. Wherever they attempt to sally from their fortified city positions, Royalist forces are met with insurgency
Hey, what's up,
and
Howard? How you doing, man?
Rail workers, many loyal to the syndicalist cause, ensure that the control of stockade and supply trains remain in red hands. Furthermore, systematic subversion of the rail networks around Royalist bastions ensures they remain trapped in their own fortifications. The King's forces are encircled and supplied only by the naval support from the Royal Navy. Facing enemies within and without, Royalist strongholds in the West Midlands begin falling one by one. And by midsummer, the first units of Loyalists and the new Republican Army clash at Nottingham, leading to a shocking victory for Red forces. With London falling into rebel hands soon after, Royalist forces realise the war has finally turned against them. In Northern Ireland, the Ulster elite enter secret negotiations with their Irish counterparts, but the talks drag on. Later, threats of separate British and Irish invasions push them to pick the lesser evil, hastily but reluctantly joining the Republic. London has fallen, and the Union is broken.
Yeah.
The Navy attempts to mass evacuate nobles and loyalists all over England. These mass evacuations cause a general panic and chaos at the ports as the Empire begins to unravel.
The evacuation was a dismal affair. Proper ladies and gentlemen crowded into cramped military ships like cattle, clinging to their meagre belongings and what they had managed to save from their opulent mansions before fleeing the country like rats. Many found their staff suddenly turned against them.
Yep.
And many more were turned over to the syndicalist rabble before they had a chance to escape.
Yeah, for real. Britain and France really screwed the pooch.
Ships, we fought over scraps.
But it's also, like I said, it's interesting to see that even though Germany won the war, they're really not much better off. And that after the syndicalist uprising happens through Europe, it really kind of seems to turn against Germany and had, not be good.
I saw two men in full evening wear enter a fistfight over a single can of tuna. So went our procession of hunger and thirst, as our home, Great Albion, disappeared in the horizon, smoke billowing over her once great cities. Never had I known such defeat and humiliation. Our way of life, the British Empire, it all collapsed in mere months.
Yeah.
Europe burns under a scarlet banner. and I'm afraid soon the world will follow her example.
By autumn, Canadian troops begin to mobilize, hoping to stall syndicalist momentum. Whatever remains of the retreating loyalists are now only focused on keeping the ports open as long as possible. They are pursued relentlessly by syndicalist forces attempting to close the southern ports before the onset of winter. The Republican Army would fail their Blitz offensive, but only barely. Plymouth, Brighton, and Southampton form a final defensive line against the syndicalist tide. Minefields and delaying actions keep the rebels at bay as the last notables are evacuated from the war zone. Fearing incoming Canadian reinforcements, the Union of Britain negotiates an intervention with the Commune of France. They help the Republican Army stage a daring proto-commando raid on Southampton. Tense nightly firefights erupt among the ports, and the citizens of these southern cities awake to Commune flags flying over their homes.
Right, exactly.
Fearing imminent French invasion, the government abandons its positions and officially declares its intent to pull out of Britain. Soon, syndicalist forces have raised scarlet banners over all the cities of England, proclaiming their victory. The revolution has been won. Great Britain, the eternal empire, had collapsed.
It's gone, brother.
Across the Channel, the German Empire saw her final victory at last.
So again, like, this makes me wonder what's happening in a lot of the British colonies at this time, like what's happening in India and what's happening in parts of Africa where, you know, they had such great influence. Is there a syndicalist uprising happening in a lot of those places? Are other rebellions and other factions uprising and coming into power in those areas? You know, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what's happening to a lot of the British forces over there? Have they been pulled back already? You know, they hadn't really gotten into what has happened to a lot of the British colonies and the forces that were there.
Last.
You know, did any of the British colonies just like maintain their prominence and power in those areas and kind of form their own little proto governments, et cetera, you know? Some are taken over by Journey. Some stay loyal. I'm sure some follow syndicalism. Yeah, I'm sure it's probably like a mix of all of those things going on.
But perhaps not the one she went looking for a decade earlier. Her hated enemies were in ruins, yes, but replacing the flawed democracies of France and Britain were new, revanchist, syndicalist states, with world revolution as their overriding goal. This threat, and all it implies, would define the rest of the 1920s and beyond. In the Union of Britain, however, those who favour what remained of the former government have only seen the beginning of what their new government portends. In 1926, with the Home Isles secured, former Labour MP and now Deputy Chairman John Wheatley establishes a secret police force called Special Operations Executive.
Yikers.
The SOE takes office in Vauxhall and reports only to the Deputy Chairman of the Union. An internal security organisation dedicated wholly to ideological purification, the SOE...
Damn. So is this like their version of like the SS or something like that, man? That sounds kind of crazy.
These actual size and operations become wreathed in secrecy and fear. Not long after their formation, remaining nobles in the home islands, deemed reactionary threats by the new syndicalist government, begin disappearing one by one.
Yep.
Black trains cross the British heartland with no travel manifest or destination.
Yikes,
the
brother.
British Red Terror has begun.
Yikes, brother.
The terror becomes a grim reminder of the cost of civil war and marks the end of the social democratic dream of the Labour wing of the Union's leadership. Appalled by the news of the SOE's formation, Union President Lansbury resigns from his post.
From the memoirs of G. Lansbury. In 1925, a darkness began to spread over our Union. Our dream of a social revolution for and by the worker was corrupted by radicalists into a rehearsal of the Jacobin nightmare of the 70s.
Well, and I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, like at this time, like with these kind of revolutions going on, it's going to be like the most radical people that are probably going to come to prominence and power and establish these new governments and law, you know, so it's not really surprising. Yeah, exactly.
1800s. It pains my heart to see the party fall to such depths of ideological depravity, bringing fire and death to its own people. I see within London today figments of the failed Bolshevik Revolution a few years ago, and warn our members that syndicalists should not repeat the mistakes of the communists. You cannot shake the devil's hand and say you were only joking.
What remained of the British
That's an interesting line. You can't shake the devil's hand and say we're only joking.
government proper congregated in Canada, vowing to one day reclaim the home isles from syndicalist mob rule. However, Britain's expansive colonial empire could not endure without a government in London. Even before the evacuations began, it had already begun to splinter, as scattered and often confusing reports filtered out to the wider empire. With the head cut from the snake, the dominions turned inward and committed to their own defense. The colonies, abandoned and freed from the shadow of the Royal Navy, entered a period of upheaval.
Yeah.
India, once the empire's crown jewel, finally collapsed into civil war between British-aligned forces and independence-minded revolutionaries.
And that's what I figured was going to happen in India. I figured there was going to end up being, you know, a civil war of that happening where British loyalists and those who've been in power are going to fight to stay in power, while, you know, Native Indian, you know, factions are going to want to take their country back for themselves.
British settlers, threatened by native majorities and fear of syndicalist agitation, abandoned by their government and the dominions alike, soon found themselves looking to Berlin to replace the Royal Navy's stabilizing influence. In a cruel twist of
some
irony,
banger quotes.
Germany had become the sole defender of the imperial order she once sought to usurp. Her status as a superpower remained unchallenged, but now the rising syndicalist tide threatened to undermine her very foundation.
Yeah. And that is really interesting too, is like Germany really at this time kind of becomes the sole superpower while all these revolutions happen. But then because of these revolutions, there becomes again like this united front of syndicalism that is eventually going to push back against them.
Constitution.
And like that's what's foreshadowing what's going to happen through World War II, it seems.
Monarchy and the underpinnings of empire. Slowly, the legacy of the Weltkrieg became clear for all to see. Germany emerged out of the Weltkrieg on the path to great power status.
Yeah,
However,
it is.
She would be.
That's what I was saying earlier. It's so crazy how, like, when you think about it, like, this is literally just the lore for a mod for a game, right? And people have taken the time to really put together in such detail with real historical figures and events, and have essentially just twisted it in this alternate reality based around, you know, what would happen if Germany won, you know? Thinking about this honestly too, like one of the other big kind of what if things that I've heard a lot of people talk about throughout history is like during World War II, at the end of World War II, a lot of people have talked about, should the United States have pushed more, into Europe and seized more territory from Russia and other countries? What would that have looked like? Because at the end of World War II, the United States, I think still to this day, had the largest standing army, and we were the only country at the time that had nuclear armaments. So like we could have dictated like anything we wanted at that point in time, you know? So like it would be interesting to see kind of a what if alternate history scenario like this played out of, you know, what if the United States had decided to continue to push against, Soviet Russia and communism at the end of World War II and had continued fighting essentially. That would be another kind of alternate history timeline of something like this that I would be interested to see if anyone had done anything about. You know what I'm saying? So many things for the accountant making these alternate timelines and not anything but easy. I like how this time would bleed in World War II and how it would go on, etc. Yeah, I mean, well, and that's the thing is like pretty much World War II was inevitable, regardless of the events of what happened in World War I, just because of all of the different things going on in the world at the time.
Challenged on every continent by syndicalist nations and uprisings. Leftist insurgencies sprung up all over the globe, destabilizing Germany's tenuous new grasp on power, and ushering in a new age of revolution. Across the world, battle lines were beginning to form. The answer could only ever be a new Great War,
Yep.
a new Weltkrieg. In the new age beyond the horizon, the sun would rise over a new empire upon which it would never set, or it would rise over a world beneath the Scarlet Banner.
Yeah, and this timeline it does. Yeah, it seems like it's basically becomes kind of an ideological war of syndicalism versus Germany, you know, and I guess potentially maybe the remnants of what's left over of the previous kingdoms, you know. I think the previous monarchies from French and Britain probably would still form some kind of alliance, the Entente or whatever it was called, you know.
To be continued.
So yeah, there we go. So yeah, there it is. That was Kaiserreich Universe Documentary Episode 3 about the British Revolution. You know, we've pretty much given, you know, my thoughts and whatnot as we get through here, but it's just interesting to see, like, how... It's just interesting to see how what happened in France has essentially spread through various other countries, and again, it's going to be a united syndicalist front versus what's going on with the German Empire. And interestingly enough, it seems that, you know, Germany's success is going to be its own downfall, and that they're spread too thin and have too much going on to take care of, and their victory will end up being their defeat. I don't know, it's kind of like poetic in a way, I guess, you know. Their victories in World War I and the collapse of France, which also then leads to the collapse of Britain, but then ends up leading to the rise of syndicalism that becomes this great united front that spreads like wildfire very quickly over a couple of years, and it's just gearing up to be what sparks the start of World War II, essentially. So I read that many World War II happened solely because of World War I, but I'm not 100% on that. Yeah, the Entente still has teeth, but I'm surprised they never mention it. But the new band of syndicalism starts in Britain called totalism, which is super radical. Yeah, it does seem like the syndicalist factions in Britain become like super radical. Like that whole, the SOE faction that seems to kind of mirror the German SS, you know, from World War II. And them going around and rounding up anyone else that was essentially thinking and speaking any differently than those people in power, and rounding them up and making them disappear. That's some scary stuff, man. That's scary stuff. So, and that could also be something that's interesting too, is like they could become so radical that they end up isolating themselves and making themselves an enemy of, you know, other syndicalist nations, you know, because they become so radical. So yeah, if I remember correctly, they make France really nervous and they kind of have to deal with them, right? And that's what I'm saying, you know. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, what's gonna happen in the next few episodes of this documentary series. I guess what the next one is going into the Russia front and what happens with the civil war that happened there. Because yeah, I guess that would be the next big kind of area on that side of the world politically, to see what's going on. From what we know of so far, you know, there was the Lenin uprising, but they got defeated, so socialism didn't take root in Russia, and they stayed a republic, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the next episode. But yeah, fascinating stuff so far. Like I've said throughout this, it's so interesting that this is, you know, an alternate timeline for a game that is for a mod for a game, and how these, you know, how these people have banded together to take real life people and events and twist them around for this alternate history. It's just fascinating. It's fascinating to me, and doing it in this documentary style. Like, you know, I used to love, you know, watching Discovery and History Channel documentaries on, you know, World War II and whatnot, and how things played out, and the various people that were involved, you know, Churchill and Rommel and all these, you know, big characters and what they did. So, but yeah, that was Kaiserreich Universe Documentary Episode 3 of the British Revolution. Links will be down below in the description as always to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiser Cat Cinema's channel. If you enjoyed this video as we go through it, do me a favor, go over there and click a like on his video. And if you've been enjoying this documentary series so far, you know, go over there and give him a sub. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership tiers and benefits that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your sport to the next level, you know, check those out and see if any of it has any kind of interest for you. But regardless, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to check out this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. We'll see you guys in the next one. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everybody.